Kia ora everyone, my name's Zach. I love rugby. Welcome back to Hakatime Rugby and welcome officially to 2020. Happy New Year to you all. I hope you had a fantastic holiday period and I hope you're all looking forward to the rugby this year. For many, 2019 was a fantastic year. For others, 2019, not so much. But we have so much to look forward to this year. So right now, I'm going to give you my preview of all of the major competitions and all of the major talking points to look forward to, guys. I'm also going to give you some insights into what Hakatime Rugby will be doing this year as well. So with that said, let's get straight into it. Let's kick things off by talking about Super Rugby, guys. It kicks off on the 30th of January. And what an interesting year it's going to be this year for Super Rugby. After the World Cup, there is a usual cycle of players either retiring or exercising their contractual options to go offshore to take up more lucrative contracts. And as a result of that, we are definitely seeing a player drain across many of the teams in Super Rugby. So this Super Rugby season is going to take on a far different complexion than we've seen in the past. Teams that have had traditionally strong core teams and players, senior players, are now going through a development and a redevelopment phase. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. What it does mean is that there are spots available for good young talent, so that's something exciting that we should all be looking out for. But what it also means is that there are spots available due to the usual cycle after World Cup in national squads. So some of the mid-tier players are now playing for national representation. And we're going to see it particularly from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, all play out in Super Rugby. And when you look across the teams and you look across the squads, it has dramatically changed. Some of the major talking points, obviously, Beauden Barrett has moved to the Blues. The number of players that have moved offshore. Canterbury Crusaders look to be quite decimated in terms of player redevelopment and turnover of players. Same with the Waratahs. Same with most of the South African franchises. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out. My expectations of this season, and if I look at each of the conferences, I would say from a New Zealand conference, I still expect that development model to be strong in Canterbury, and they should be relatively competitive. But I think the pick of the New Zealand franchises is probably the Chiefs. And when you look at guys like Aaron Cruden coming back, you look at some of the core within that squad, it's really, really exciting time there for the Chiefs. They've also got Warren Gatland there as their head coach. That's his first assignment before he kicks coming back towards New Zealand. So how he integrates into New Zealand rugby is going to be another very interesting talking point. From an Australian Super Rugby conference perspective, now when I look at the teams, I think the Waratahs are probably the most heavily affected by player drain and turnover. But there are some exciting guys that are coming through in each of those teams. I did a preview video with the Melbourne Rebels, so if you haven't seen that yet, please go and check that out, where we discuss the impact of that player turnover and what they're looking forward to in the season and how we think they go. So that's well worth a look if you haven't seen that already. But to me, the pick of the teams in Super Rugby Conference in Australia is probably the Reds. Certainly they've got a great core there, a great group of young guys, but also, as the Melbourne Rebels alluded to me during our interview, is they are a team that's really up for it. Brad Thorne is their coach, and he's done fantastic work there already. He'll be looking to build on that. But also they welcome in some serious talent, and that means they're going to be a real force, I think, come the later stages of the Super Rugby season. Now, when I look to the South African Conference, one thing that I'm really looking forward to is with that turnover of players, is to see some of that younger talent coming through. There is so much promising backline talent, and we know that the traditional style and method of South African teams is to be very much forward dominated. But the skill levels that they have in the backline, both at the development level but also at the Super Rugby level, is incredible. And some of the tries that were put on last year were just spectacular. So I'm expecting more of that, and what I'm looking forward to is those players that are going to come through as new development players that we need to look out for in the future, those that can move into Springboks spots, and those that may potentially be in the running to play against the Lions in 2021. That's another thing we've got to keep at the back of the mind as we go through all of these previews and all these competitions this year, is that there is a Lions tour next year, and all of the building work is happening right now for that tour in both the United Kingdom, including Ireland, as well as in South Africa. So those are all interesting talking points, guys. There's going to be a lot of information there that we'll need to digest, because it sets us up both for the Rugby Championship as well as that tour from the Lions next year. That's Super Rugby. Let's move forward. We also know that Premiership Rugby is underway. European Rugby is underway right now. Now, during the break, I did manage to catch a few games, and I have been watching the highlights quite extensively throughout that break. And wow, what a group of talent they have there. And some of the rugby there is fantastic. The tries that are being put on, excellent. I've been really, really impressed by the standard there. And what I really like about Premiership Rugby, particularly from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, is that there are a lot of players and names that you will recognise in pretty much every team. So there is something in there for everyone. If you're from the Southern Hemisphere and you haven't had a look at Premiership Rugby, I would say go and do that. Now, what we can see there, obviously, is that Exeter is top of the table. They've been going pretty well. Saracens is coming back after the scandal there. Obviously, docked a number of points and are sitting in last place. But with that said, they are still the strongest team in the Premiership without a doubt. And for every team that is coming up against them, they are the benchmark. So it's a great opportunity to test where each of these teams is at. Now, what I'm expecting from the remainder of the season, obviously it goes through to June, so it's quite a significant season, is the teams look like they are starting to separate themselves. I've been very, very impressed with Exeter. They've been fantastic, and obviously Saracens has been great in recent weeks. But what I'm expecting certainly expecting improvement from the Tigers, the Leicester Tigers, and let's see how it goes. But ultimately, there are some fantastic teams in here, and I encourage you all to check them out. I will be watching and probably doing a number of videos on Premiership Rugby as the season continues. And what I've decided to select a team. I've been backwards and forwards with a number of subscribers on who I should choose. But today I'm going to reveal to you who my Premiership Rugby team will be on the Hakatime Rugby channel from now until the foreseeable future. And that team is the Bristol Bears. Now, you might wonder why the Bristol Bears, and to be honest, I don't have a good reason. I certainly recognise some of the players, and the Bristol Bears has a real feel, obviously with Pat Lam there, with Stephen Luatua there, with Charles Piutau there as well. It has a feel of that 2013, 2014 Auckland Blues team. So there's a bit of familiarity there for me, but the main reason that I'm selecting the Bristol Bears as my team going forward is this guy. Best attacking rugby player in the world, up there with probably the top 5 to 10 best rugby players in the world, in my opinion. He lit up the Rugby World Cup. Semi Radradra is my favourite player in World Rugby, without a doubt. I supported him in Rugby League, and I'm going to do the same in Rugby Union. So for that reason, Bristol Bears is my team. But as I say, I encourage you all to go and check out the Premiership games, check out the highlights, and you'll certainly recognise a lot of the names and get them behind it, because that is going to give us some insights into what we can expect from players in the Six Nations. And Six Nations Rugby is going to be huge this year. Though there are certainly some talking points there that we need to cover off, and we're going to do that right now. Six Nations Rugby, guys. Now, it is going to be a huge season in 2020. Again, similarly to the Impact and Super Rugby, there is some turnover after Rugby World Cup, and we've seen some players go out, but more importantly, we've seen a number of coaches who have been their mainstay coaches who have moved on. Obviously, Warren Gatland is one, Joe Schmidt is another, and then also the French have changed their coach. Eddie Jones has been retained in England for 2 years, so there's a bit of stability there. But it's going to be interesting to see how those new coaches step in and step up, and what kind of changes they will make to both selection and to strategy, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Without a doubt, the favourite going to the Six Nations has got to be England. Their World Cup performance has been fantastic. Their 2019, if we exclude some of the games, obviously as part of development into the Rugby World Cup in the Six Nations last year, but they had a fantastic year last year and were very, very dominant in a number of games. Obviously, they weren't able to go that one extra step and win the final. But what they did demonstrate is that they have a great core of young players, fantastic attackers, and a head coach who is second to none when it comes to strategy. Well, maybe second to Rassie Erasmus, but you get my point, right? He's a fantastic strategist and a great coach in Eddie Jones. So I'm expecting England will probably be the favourites going into the Six Nations. When I look at the next teams that I'm expecting to do well, I expect the French will probably have a good year this year as well. So they'll be well worth a look. Obviously, their 2020 takes on a new meaning because it is the start of the next World Cup cycle, and the next World Cup is in France. Now, I previously previewed discussions and changes when I did a collaboration with Modern Bock Rugby, so if you haven't seen that, please go and check it out. And we spoke about some of those teams we expect to be doing very, very well come the next cycle of the World Cup, and France was one that we identified as a huge amount of upside. They have some great young players. Obviously, Romain Ntamak was named the Young Player of the Year last year, and he had a fantastic World Cup. I actually thought the impact of him going off was more significant to France in that quarterfinal that they lost than the red card. They might have got home if Romain Ntamak was there on the field for that last 20 minutes, but obviously he got injured and was unable to continue. But I think he's going to have a huge next few years, and he's certainly a player to watch. And the investment that I'm expecting to go into French rugby in the next couple of years means that they are well worth watching and should probably go well in the Six Nations this year. Other teams to watch. Now, between Wales and Ireland, there is significant change there, obviously, with their almost talismanic head coaches in Youre, Gatland, and in Joe Schmidt. They're certainly looked up as as fantastic coaches that have done well for both Ireland and Wales. Now, the impact of their change, I think, is going to be very, very significant, and how they're able to recover will be very, very interesting to watch. If I look at those two teams, I probably think Wales has the most upside, in that they retain a very, very strong core group there. Now, they had a fantastic World Cup as well. Their issue, obviously, was that it was towards the end of a long season and they just started to run out of steam. But in that World Cup semi-final, they ran South Africa very, very close, and they should be very proud of their effort. So I expect them to be another force come 2020 in the Six Nations, but the impact of Warren Gatland moving on is going to be very, very interesting to assess. Similarly, Joe Schmidt. Now, what I'm more looking forward on this side is hopefully the shackles are released somewhat so that Irish rugby can actually look forward to selections of young guys that may benefit Irish rugby in the long run. Obviously, one of the major talking points from the Rugby World Cup for Ireland was that a number of players were probably there a little bit too long, and then certainly they ran into the All Blacks in the quarterfinal and just seemed to run out of steam. But the signs were there early stages of the World Cup as well, obviously going down to Japan in the pool play. So I think if the shackles are released somewhat and if some of the younger players are getting selection, we should see a real redevelopment of Irish rugby, and I think it's going to be fantastic to watch. More of an attacking mindset than we've seen in the past. You can probably expect that with Andy Farrell now as their head coach. And let's see, if they're bold enough to make some of those hard selections and bring in some young blood, I think they can still go well in the Six Nations this year. But if they try to stick to that same old game plan, then I think it's a little bit too predictable, and teams have figured that out now in 2019 and obviously leading into 2020. So a lot of upside there for Irish rugby if they're willing to make the tough calls. Let's see if they will do that. Then obviously if we look at Scotland and we look at Italy, now they'll be hoping to sneak some wins where they can. Obviously Scottish rugby very heavily relies on a couple of key players, a few key players. If they go well, and they are world-beating players, don't get me wrong, if they go well, they're able to disrupt the big teams. We saw that with Scotland against England. They were able to disrupt and probably had the better of that game last year and should have won, but unfortunately came away with a draw. But certainly they'll be hardened by that, and certainly they'll need their big game players to stand up. The other thing from an Italian perspective, Sergio Parisse is having his last game. He was disappointed that he didn't get to go out against the All Blacks. He's decided this will be his last game. What a stalwart of rugby, and what a way for him to go out at home for his beloved Italian team. So that's well worth watching as well. Hakatime Rugby will be covering the Six Nations. I think what I'll do is try and do a few live streams during the Six Nation games. They're at odd times, obviously, from an Australian perspective, but I'm really into the Six Nations this year because I've started doing the series on the Lions and preparations for the Lions tour next year in 2021. So I'll be covering the Six Nations very, very closely because that will show us who are those players that are standing up to fill some of those key spots in the Lions team. And I'll do an update to the Lions series. If you haven't checked out my Lions series, make sure you do so, guys. I'll be doing updates to that both as an outcome of the Six Nations, once we get some 2020 clarity on selections, and also after the Rugby Championship, once we're a little bit clearer on how the Springboks are expected to go. Okay, let's talk Rugby Championship, guys. But before we touch on the wider Rugby Championship, there is one match in particular that I am extremely excited for, and that is the 100th Test match between the old rivals, the All Blacks and the Springboks. And what a history it has been between New Zealand and South Africa over a long period of time in the history of rugby. They are traditionally the two top sides in world rugby. And obviously, I think right now they're ranked 1 and 2, actually, New Zealand and South Africa. So we are set up for a huge clash in that 100th match. What I'm hoping for is an epic encounter between two great rugby sides. And I don't think they will disappoint in 2020. So that's one well worth the price of admission, guys, and well worth watching that. Make sure that you check that out. Now, when we look at the Rugby Championship, there is a huge amount of turnover. Obviously, the big three from the Southern Hemisphere all have new coaches. Steve Hansen has moved on, Michael Checker has moved on, Erasmus has moved up. So there will be new head coaches in each of the roles. What will be interesting is how they maintain their dominance and continuity as they go through into 2020 and who they will select. Now, Dave Rennie for the Wallabies is a fantastic acquisition for them. He's a no-nonsense guy. He's got a great focus between forwards and backs. He typically brings a very, very balanced attack with no-nonsense forwards that can attack well as high, fast-paced backline attacking moves. The Chiefs have always been traditionally strong under Dave Rennie because of his attacking mindset and his uncompromising mindset when it comes to the forward. So Australian rugby, you've got a lot to look forward there with a great coach. My only ask is that Australian Rugby Union gets out of the way and lets him do what he needs to do to build a successful and winning team there. So let's see if he can do that. Obviously for the All Blacks, change of coach. Ian Foster is there, unpopular appointment, that one, with Scott Robertson missing out on the head coaching role. I think we can all understand why that choice was made. The All Blacks will always traditionally favour an incumbent because they like to maintain those values that have been proven over a long period of time and reward from within. So ultimately no complaints there. I mean, I do have some issues with the way they went about the appointments, but that's another topic for another day. But what I will say there is that New Zealand rugby will still be strong in 2020. Those that have doubts or are wishing the worst on Ian Foster, I think you've probably got your priorities in the wrong place. But at the end of the day, there is still a great pool of talent in New Zealand rugby, and they will be at the fore come Rugby Championship time. Selections will be interesting. Obviously, Grant Fox has been maintained as chief selector for the All Blacks, and a number of players are not available this year as well, so new spots available, as I mentioned. But there are still some fantastic guys. Obviously, Beauden Barrett, any team with Beauden Barrett, any team with Ardie Savea. We've obviously seen the attacking prowess of Sevu Reece and George Bridge. Obviously, the midfield spots are up for grabs now, and I expect Ngani Laumapi will be there with Sonny Bill Williams moving on. You've still got those great attacking players and Anton Leonard-Brown and Jack Goodhue there as well. Damien McKenzie is back in New Zealand as well, so whether or not he will get an opportunity and resort back to that fullback slot, I think that's probably the right call. Is you move Beauden Barrett back into 10, you use Richie Mo'unga as that secondary first five option, and then obviously you've got Damien McKenzie there at the back. So I think that's what they'll go for. But what's really, really interesting this year is who will replace Kieran Reid. When you think about number 8 in All Blacks rugby, and without Kieran, there is no one that immediately jumps to mind. So there is a spot available there for good young players that are good enough and prove themselves in Super Rugby. So certainly something to look out for. From a South African perspective, the biggest talking point is Rassie Erasmus moving on, and who will fill that spot. Now, a number of names have been bandied around, but I guess what I hope there is that the implementation of this director of rugby role is done in the right way, because I look at many other teams and it never seems to be implemented to the level where the head coach has the right level of autonomy to make the big calls without being undermined by a director of rugby. Now, I can't see Rassie Erasmus doing that. I think his view will be more about maintaining high performance at the top level and allowing high performance rugby to filter down into each of the franchises as well into the lower levels of South African rugby. And that's the right way to implement it. Director of rugby should be there as overall oversight and continuity of a very clear strategy over a longer period of time. Coaches come and go and tend to come and go based on performance, which means a coach's focus is not strategic in nature over a long period of time. A coach's focus is very, very narrow, typically during the duration of their contract. So this allows a wider, more strategic view, and Rassie was very complimentary to the All Blacks, but also very telling, I think, in his approach when he said that the challenge for South Africa now is to be as consistent as the All Blacks. That's a great sign, because it means that his focus is about maintaining high performance at the Springboks level and allowing that to filter back up. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I touched on it in the Super Rugby preview as well, guys, that I think one of the key talking points here will be some of the younger players, some of that talent that's coming through in South African rugby now, the spots available, and some of those high-level attacking players that we've seen throughout South African rugby, but probably haven't had enough exposure at the Springboks level. I'm hoping they bring that attacking mindset. I'm hoping they're able to evolve their strategy so that it does include more attacking plays, and if they do that, they will be very, very difficult to beat. One thing we cannot forget about in 2020, guys, is Rugby Sevens. What a fantastic end to 2019, obviously with the Cape Town Sevens, as well as Dubai Sevens. And there are some great, strong teams that are coming through. New Zealand obviously won in Cape Town, as well as the Springboks won in Dubai. And the Boks team looked incredible. They were probably unlucky, I think, in that Cape Town final, not to put more points on, but they certainly looked the most dangerous of the attacking teams in Sevens rugby. Then add to that obviously the Fijians, who are always strong. Add to that also the USA team, the Eagles, who are also strong, and there's a fantastic series there that is coming up. But all of that is a prelude and an entree to the main event, the main course, which is an Olympics in Japan in 2020. Now, I know a number of high-level players have declared their availability for Sevens rugby, and particularly to have a crack at that gold medal. So it's going to be interesting to see the selections that come, and ultimately who will be there to fill that spot. Now, the Fijians are defending Olympics champions, and I expect them to be strong here as well. What I would love to hear is news that Semi Radradra has made himself available for Fijian rugby in the Sevens, and he's going to play at the Olympics. Oh, that would just light the whole place up. But I expect they will be strong. New Zealand will be strong, South Africa will be strong, and the US will be strong. So let's see how that plays out. I think favourites going into the tournament, the Olympics at this point in time, have probably got to be the Springboks. Obviously, they didn't win when South African Sevens didn't win in Cape Town, but they were certainly dominant in Dubai. And throughout both tournaments, they have looked like the stronger of the teams, certainly the most attacking depth of all of the teams. So I'm expecting them to be the team to beat. New Zealand will be nipping at the heels, the US will be nipping at the heels, and Fijian rugby will be nipping at the heels. So make sure you check that one out as well, guys. I'll be following it, and I'll also be doing some live streams throughout the day and throughout those finals, and definitely as part of the finals. We'll be doing some previews, some live streams, and some post-match reviews as well. We've also got the June tours, guys, and we've got the November tours of the Northern Hemisphere. So a lot will be there for us to divulge. It gives us an opportunity to see how the Springboks go against the Northern Hemisphere teams, and vice versa, what we can expect from the Lions going into 2021. Outside of that, guys, in 2020, Hakatime Rugby is looking to do a lot more collaborations with a lot of different rugby channels. So let me know down below who you'd like me to collaborate with. Obviously, as part of previews at Six Nations, whether it's Super Rugby, whether it's the Rugby Championship, there's so much rugby that we have to talk about, so I'm willing and open to do collaborations with many different YouTubers. If you're interested and you're watching this, let me know. Email is in the description, so make sure you get in contact. But I'd also like to know from you guys, who do you think I should be collaborating with in 2020? Some other things that I'll be touching on. I've been reading a number of books. Here's a few of them right here. So I will do some book reviews this year as well. There have been some fantastic insights that I've got from the Eddie Jones book and the Warren Gatland book here as well, guys. So I'm going to cover that off in detail and let you know my thoughts. But certainly it has given a real different perspective on a lot of major rugby milestones throughout history, but also during the Rugby World Cup. So I'm going to touch on those for you guys. Outside of that, I'll be doing more live streams this year. That way it gives you an opportunity to interact with me. If you haven't checked out my Instagram as well, check that out. You can comment, see what's going on with Hakatime Rugby regularly. That's in the description box as well. And that's it. Let me know if I've missed anything or if there's anything else that you're interested in, guys. I cannot wait for rugby to get underway in 2020. There are some huge matches coming up. Super Rugby is coming up. The Premiership is underway right now. The Six Nations is coming up. We've got a lot to look forward in the early part of 2020. So make sure you enjoy it. Get involved in the conversation down below, guys. Let me know what you think. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit like. It helps me and the channel out a lot. Thank you very much, guys. I will see you very, very soon in 2020.